My grandfather left me $50,000 for college, but my parents stole it for their debts. Now they're stalking me for exposing them, and the whole family knows their betrayal. I'm 26 years old. I work in digital marketing for a tech company, and I've been living in a completely different state from where I grew up for like 2 years now. And honestly, I need to tell this story because what happened with my parents basically forced me to rebuild my life from scratch. The thing is, when I was 17, my senior year of high school, my parents lost their jobs like a week apart, literally 1 week. And that's when everything started going to shit. My dad, Jonathan, was a corporate lawyer at a big firm. He'd been there for like 20 years or something. And my mom, Christine, was a real estate agent and she was doing pretty well. I mean, we weren't millionaires, but we lived comfortably, you know? Nice house, vacations every year, that kind of thing. But turns out my dad got fired for something related to conflict of interest. I never really understood the details because they never wanted to talk about it with me, and my mom basically got let go because the real estate market was horrible at the time and the company was cutting staff. I was an only child, and my parents were always kind of controlling, but nothing crazy. You know, normal, strict parent rules, curfew, they want to know where you are all the time, that kind of stuff. But when they lost their jobs, they started to change. Like they became more tense, more critical. Everything was a problem. I remember my dad started drinking more. Not like alcoholic in rehab level, but a couple of whiskeys every night instead of one on weekends. My mom became obsessed with saving money. Like we switched to the cheapest brands of everything. She'd turn off lights if you left a room for 2 seconds. That level of anxiety about money. I was applying to colleges at that time, and I'd gotten a full scholarship to a decent university like 2 hours from home. Nothing prestigious, but a good program and full coverage of tuition and housing, which was amazing considering the situation. My parents acted like they were proud. But there was something weird about how they celebrated it. Like forced. You know what I mean? What I didn't know, and I found this out like 3 months later, is that my grandfather, Frederick, my dad's dad, had been saving money for my college since I was born. It was a fund of like $50,000, something like that my grandfather had been depositing every month for years and years. He died when I was 15, and according to him, he'd left very clear instructions that this money was only for my education, period. But my parents had access to the account because technically it was in my dad's name, with my name as beneficiary or something legal like that. And basically, during those months after losing their jobs, they drained the entire account, everything. $50,000 gone to pay their debts, the mortgage, their credit cards, whatever. I found out in the most horrible way possible. I was in my first semester of college, I'd gotten the scholarship, like I said, but obviously I needed money for books, food, personal expenses, that kind of thing. I asked my mom about Grandpa's fund because I'd always known it existed. He'd mentioned it to me several times before he died. He'd tell me, "Honey, don't worry about college. I've got you covered." And my mom got all uncomfortable and told me they needed to use that money temporarily for emergencies, but that they were going to pay me back. I asked her how much was left, and she basically admitted there was nothing left. Zero. $50,000 that my grandfather had specifically saved for me over years. Gone, without my permission, without even telling me. I was 18, legally an adult, and technically what they did was in a legal gray area because my name was on the account but my dad was the primary holder, so it wasn't exactly theft, but morally it was horrible. I confronted my dad and he yelled at me, like really yelled at me, saying I was a selfish child who didn't understand how hard it was to support a family, that they'd given me everything for 18 years, and that I had no right to judge them for using money that was technically in their account. My mom cried and made me feel guilty. She told me they were going to lose the house, that I had no heart, that family helps each other. But what made me angrier than anything is that they never asked me. They never included me in the decision. They just assumed they could take my money because they could. And when I told them that Grandpa Frederick had wanted that money to be specifically for my education, my dad told me my grandfather was already dead and that he knew better what to do with the family's money. That's when I decided I had to get out of there. I was 18. I was in college with a full scholarship, so technically I could survive without them. I told them I wasn't coming home for winter break and that I was going to look for work. My mom threatened to cut off any financial support, and I said, okay, because they'd already stolen Grandpa's money anyway, so what else could they take from me? She hung up on me and didn't talk to me for weeks. My dad sent me a text message that said something like, "If you want to be so independent, go ahead, but don't come crying when you realize how hard real life is." I was 18 years old, in my first year of college, and I basically lost my family overnight. The next 4 years were brutal. I worked everything: waitress, barista, tutor, administrative assistant. Sometimes I had 2 or even 3 jobs at the same time. I slept like 5 hours a night because I had classes during the day and shifts at night. I ate a lot of ramen and cheap pasta. I had no social life because I literally had no time or money to go out. My roommates would go out on weekends and I'd be working or studying. It was lonely and exhausting, and there were moments when I thought about giving up, about going back to my parents and putting up with their control in exchange for a place to live and food. But every time I thought about that, I remembered how they'd stolen from me and lied. And it made me angrier, and I kept going. During those 4 years, my parents tried to contact me maybe 3 or 4 times. It was always my mom, never my dad. She'd send me text messages on my birthday or Christmas, generic stuff like, "We hope you're well, we miss you, the family sends their regards." Never an apology. They never acknowledged what they did. They just acted like I was the bad one for pulling away. I'd respond with short things like, "I'm fine, thanks," and that's it. I didn't want to give details about my life. I didn't want them to know where I was working, or who I was dating, or how I was doing, because I felt like they didn't deserve it. You know? They'd lost that privilege when they decided their financial comfort was more important than the education my grandfather had worked so hard for. I graduated with honors, which was a huge achievement considering I basically did it alone while working full-time. I got a job in digital marketing for a tech company in another state, like 6 hours from where I grew up, and I moved literally 2 weeks after graduation. I didn't tell my parents I was moving out of state. I just disappeared. I blocked their numbers, archived our chats, basically cut contact completely. Some relatives wrote to me asking what happened, cousins and uncles who didn't know the whole story, and I'd just tell them that my parents and I had had differences and that I needed space. I didn't want to drag the whole family into the drama. Honestly, like 2 years passed, 2 full years without talking to my parents, and honestly, it was liberating. I focused on my work, made new friends, started dating an amazing guy named Nicholas who worked in software development. We met at a networking event and connected immediately. I told him the whole story with my parents on our third date because I felt like he needed to know what he was getting into, and he was super understanding. He told me his parents were complicated too, and that he completely understood why I'd cut contact. My life was finally starting to feel stable, you know? I had a good job, a good salary, a supportive boyfriend, friends, my own apartment. It was the life I'd worked so hard to build. And then, out of nowhere, I get a message from my mom. It wasn't from her normal number. It was from a number I didn't recognize, and the message said something like, "I know we've been distant, but your father and I really want to reconnect with you. We've been working on ourselves and we have a surprise for you. Can we come visit you?" My first instinct was to block the number immediately, but something stopped me. Maybe curiosity, maybe a stupid part of me that still wanted to believe my parents could change. I responded saying, I didn't feel comfortable with a visit, but that we could talk on the phone if they really wanted to reconnect. My mom responded, insisting that the surprise required us to see each other in person, that it was something important, that please give them a chance. That's when the pressure from the whole family started. Suddenly, cousins I hadn't heard from in years were writing to me. My Aunt Elizabeth, my mom's sister, called me saying my parents had really changed, that they'd been in therapy, that they wanted to make things right. I felt ambushed. Like clearly my parents had mobilized the whole family to convince me to see them. I told my aunt I appreciated her concern but that I needed time to think. She kept pressing, saying the surprise was a trust fund, that my parents had been saving to pay me back Grandpa's money, that they wanted to make it up to me. That made me doubt. I'm not going to lie, because if they really were trying to give me back that money, then maybe they had changed. But something didn't add up. If they'd really changed, why couldn't they just transfer me the money? Why did they need to see me in person? Why all this production with the family? I sent them a long email, like really long, explaining that I appreciated their attempt to reconnect but that I needed to establish clear boundaries. I told them I wasn't ready for an in-person visit, that if they wanted to show they'd changed, they could start by respecting my boundaries. that any communication had to be in writing first until I felt comfortable talking on the phone, and that I didn't want them to involve other relatives in our situation. I thought it was reasonable, right? Like, I'm willing to try, but on my terms. The response I got was crazy. My dad sent me an email that was like 3 pages long, basically telling me I was ungrateful, that they'd raised me and sacrificed everything for me, that my extreme independence was unhealthy, and that I was being manipulated by my boyfriend, whom they'd never met, by the way. He said the reason they needed to see me in person was because they wanted to make sure I was okay, that I wasn't in an abusive relationship, that I wasn't making bad decisions. My mom sent another email saying I was breaking her heart, that they just wanted the best for me, that how could I be so cruel to deny them the opportunity to make things right. Neither of them acknowledged what they'd done wrong. Neither apologized for stealing my college fund. They just blamed me for being distant and unfamiliar. That's when I realized nothing had changed. The therapy, the trust fund, all that story was pure manipulation. I decided not to respond and to block their new numbers and emails. I thought eventually they'd give up. But no. Things got worse. I started receiving text messages from unknown numbers, threatening messages saying things like, "You can't run from your family forever," or, "You're going to regret treating your parents like this." I couldn't prove it was them, but it was obvious. Then I realized they'd found me on Instagram. I had my account private, but apparently someone in the Cross family had given them access or something, and they started looking through photos of me to figure out where I lived. I had a photo in front of my building that I'd uploaded months earlier without thinking, and they basically used that photo to track down my address. One afternoon, I was in my apartment with Nicholas, and I got a call from the building doorman saying there was a man claiming to be my father, and that he wanted to come up. I told the doorman not to let him up, that he wasn't welcome, and to call security if he caused problems. My dad apparently got aggressive with the doorman, saying he had a right to see his daughter, that they couldn't keep him from entering. The doorman had to threaten to call the police to get him to leave. I was shaking, literally shaking, because I couldn't believe they'd gone that far. I sent them a message from Nicholas's number, saying that if they showed up at my building again, I was going to call the police and file a restraining order. My mom responded saying I was being dramatic, that they just wanted to talk, that I didn't have to make everything so difficult. Nicholas and I decided it wasn't safe to stay in that apartment, so we looked for another place and moved like a month later. We didn't tell anyone in the family the new address, not even the cousins I thought were trustworthy, because I didn't trust anyone anymore. I deleted my social media or made them all ultra-private, basically became invisible online. It was stressful and expensive, and I shouldn't have had to do it, but I felt like I had no choice, you know? My own parents were stalking me. Things came to a critical point at a family gathering for a cousin. I wasn't going to go, obviously, but my best friend Stephanie, who knew the whole story, went because she was friends with that cousin too. And it turns out my parents were there. Stephanie told me afterwards that my parents were acting like nothing had happened, saying I was very busy with work. That's why. I hadn't gone, basically lying about why we weren't in contact. Stephanie, bless her, confronted them in front of everyone. She asked them directly why they'd stolen my college fund, why they'd harassed me, why they didn't respect my boundaries. My parents got super defensive. My mom started crying. My dad told Stephanie to mind her own business, but the damage was done. The whole family now knew the truth, or at least the version of the truth Stephanie gave them. After that, I started receiving messages from other relatives, some supporting me and saying they didn't know how bad the situation had been, others trying to defend my parents, saying all families have problems and that I should forgive. A cousin on my dad's side, Justin, sent me a long message telling me I was being immature, that my parents had only done what they thought was best at the time, that money wasn't as important as family. I responded telling him that if money wasn't so important, then why had my parents stolen it in the first place, and that real family doesn't steal or harass, and I blocked him too. My parents, after the whole family found out the truth, lost a ton of social credibility. Apparently, several relatives stopped inviting them to events. Some even told them directly that what they'd done was wrong. My Aunt Elizabeth called me apologizing for having pressured me to see them, saying my parents had lied to her about the whole situation and that she didn't know things were so bad. I thanked her for calling, but told her I needed to keep my distance from everyone for a while, until things calmed down. I sent one last message to my parents, very clear and direct, saying that if they tried to contact me again, if they showed up at my building, if they sent someone else to look for me. I was going to file a formal restraining order and possibly sue them for harassment. I gave them the option to let it go peacefully or face legal consequences. My mom responded with a super long message, full of guilt tripping, saying she never thought her daughter would treat her worse than a stranger, that they'd sacrificed everything for me and this is how I repaid them, that when I had my own kids I'd understand. My dad didn't respond at all. And that's how everything ended up. It's been like 6 months since that and I haven't heard anything from them. I don't know if they finally understood or if they just gave up, but the silence has been a relief. Honestly. Nicholas and I are still together. In fact, he officially moved in with me at the new apartment a few months ago. My job is going well. They gave me a promotion recently. I have a stable and peaceful life, far from the drama and toxicity. Sometimes I feel guilty, like I wonder if I was too harsh, if I should have given another chance. But then I remember everything that happened, and I realize I did the right thing by protecting myself. I never recovered Grandpa's money, and I probably never will. But I learned to live, without it and without them. I built my life from scratch, with my own hands, and nobody can take that away from me, you know? Some relatives still write to me from time to time asking how I am, and I keep in contact with the ones who respected my boundaries and didn't try to force me to reconcile. With the rest, I simply don't talk. It's simpler that way. My life now is mine, completely mine. And even though it cost me a lot to get here, every sacrifice was worth it.